Oceania International Championships. My name is Rosemary Kelly, and I'm joined by Labuisa Akjosh Chromie to bring you through round 10 here. Round 11, we have a lot of Swiss rounds today, still going for day 2.
We're in the double digits for sure, and you're right, you know, the temperature may have cooled a little bit. It's still very sunny in Melbourne, but the Pokemon action is still as hot as ever, as these trainers who have made it all the way to day 2 are going to battle it out through a further 5 Swiss rounds to try and get into that elusive top cut of top 8.
Yeah, we've already have 1 Swiss round down.
In that steel type, then you're not going to worry about any poison damage. But let's get into the Pokemon action here. It is going to be Fluttermane and the Dondozo out on the field for Yuya, and on the opposing side, Fluttermane, but paired up with that Talonflame. Oh, and keeping my fingers crossed, Gastrodon's in the back.
Oh, I think you're right about this one, Lou. At least I would hope that Jessie has brought Gastrodon to this game number 1, especially seeing that Dondozo across the way. But there's immediate speed control available from Jessie's Talonflame. So you could go for something like the Tailwind here, especially to allow your Fluttermane to really do some damage. But I love the Will-O-Wisp as an option as well, just to start keeping this Dondozo in check.
Yep, completely agree. We've seen it time and time again with Dondozo getting burnt or getting put to sleep as a way to kind of neutralize its offensive pressure on the field. And no surprise, it's actually going to switch right out of here in the face of that potential Will-O-Wisp. Remember, it's open team sheets. This is information that Yuya will be privy to, and bringing in the Arcanine, a Pokemon that's not going to be affected by that fire status move at all, and you can throw down a cheeky Intimidate primarily against that opposing Talonflame.
Yeah, but I think there's also a really nice other option there. So a very safe switch here for Yuya to be able to bring in that Arcanine, because what if you do have the Iron Hands in the back as well as the opposing Arcanine that is present on Jessie's team? But we're seeing a Terrestrialization right away, and we will see that Will-O-Wisp fail into the Fire-type Arcanine there.
Yeah, really nice adjustment from Yuya here, and going for the Shadow Ball as well into that Talonflame that didn't opt to use its Gale Wings to set up a Tailwind here, but will deal a significant chunk of damage to it. Fluttermane, however, going to retaliate with a Shadow Ball of its very own from Jessie's side, and that's why it's a really nice Terrestrialization into Grass type on Yuya's side, but it did get that drop.
Yeah, the special defense drop could be really important here, just looking at the Fluttermane being able to do a little bit more damage, but there really isn't too many other special attackers on the team to help follow that up unless that Gastrodon is in fact in the back. But as of right now, I'm really looking at this Fluttermane on Yuya's side, not only because it's been able to deal some good damage to the Talonflame, but that Terrestrialization means that Dondozo can't do that now.
Yep, that's very true. Dondozo isn't going to be able to go into that Steel Terror type we were talking about. That is something that Fluttermane has claimed. But I think it was the right situation here. You're going to be able to try and get another possible Shadow Ball off, try and deal some damage maybe to the opposing Shadowmane, or find a way to shut down this Talonflame, which I think is a good reason why then Jessie's switching out, knowing it seems to be a prime target for Yuya.
Yeah, and you can actually see there that Gastrodon's not in the back for this game. So I'm kind of looking at whether or not there's going to be a good answer to the Dondozo if the Tatsugiri is also present. But look at that.
Grimmsnarl's gone. We're talking about Pokemon being present. Grimmsnarl's not even here anymore. It was good for it to be able to jump in and jump right back out. But I think it's wise to preserve that Talonflame, because the Fluttermane on Jessie's side can now deal with the opposing Fluttermane that was applying pressure with that Shadow Ball.
Yeah, and at this point, you know, you're really looking at Jessie trying to make the most of every single turn here. After losing the Grimmsnarl so early, you don't really have the ability to help keep your defenses up and strong anymore. And especially when you're against that Dondozo, this is going to be a really tough one here unless Jessie's able to take firm control.
Yeah, Talonflame's back in action here, and we did see the Extreme Speed come out from that opposing Arcanine, so that's something that Talonflame has to worry about. It doesn't have the best defensive capabilities, and obviously that Arcanine, it hasn't been intimidated in any way, so it's going to be able to hit still really, really hard. I mean, Dondozo now, do you want to try and fuse it up with that Tatsugiri, or does the Arcanine want to take full advantage and go for that Extreme Speed, try and deal with Talonflame right off the bat?
It depends on whether or not Yuya sees that there's that, you know, how much of a threat is Tailwind, right? Or how much of a threat is just the Talonflame in general. And it looks like Yuya's just going to go ahead and opt to switch out the Arcanine and get things going here with the Dondozo and Tatsugiri.
There we go. Little Tatsugiri jumps into the mouth of the Dondozo, activates its Commander ability, and is going to get all these nice juicy boosts. Whether the Talonflame would fall victim to the possibility of that Extreme Speed coming through, we will have to see. But this could be a nice opportunity for Jessie to do some good damage to this opposing Dondozo, particularly with a Terrestrialization here.
Yeah, the Terrestrialization could be really big, just to be able to keep this Talonflame a little bit stronger, especially because Jessie was kind of expecting the Extreme Speed to come through. So the Ghost Terra type is really nice to be able to negate that type of pressure. It will allow this Talonflame to go for the Will-O-Wisp, though, without the threat of that priority move on the field. And to burn the Dondozo here is nice to get rid of some of that attack, as well as just be able to keep it in check. But that Fluttermane unfortunately, the bird's not going to save it this time.
Yeah, critical hits are a thing, and that's sometimes what you need to do. Dondozo was going to take that burn. The Talonflame was really brave, actually, going for that Ghost Terror to avoid taking the normal type extreme speed, and then, you know, in retaliation, the Dondozo's like, yep, sure, I'm burned, but I've still got a lot of weight behind me. I can throw that Heavy Slam down and deal with the Flutter Mane. Iron Hand's now on the field, though, and again, this is a Pokemon that can still deal considerable amount of damage to that opposing Dondozo, something like a Wild Charge, considering that, as you mentioned, Dondozo cannot go into Terra Steel now. It's still going to be that water type. It's going to hit really hard. There's no way to remove the boost necessarily, so that's why the burn was so critical.
Yeah, and this taunt is really nice as well because it shuts off Dondozo's ability to go for Yawn, which might be a really nice way to keep this Iron Hands in check. But the Earthquake here, and look at just how little it does to the Iron Hands. And with that Ghost Terra, yes, Talonflame's going to take a little bit of damage, but it is still up.
It's not every day you see a bird getting hit by the Earthquake, but that Terra typing, you know, normally we see it when it's kind of roosting down on the ground, but no. And it's able to survive, and I think that's a credit to the Talonflame and the way that the trainers built it as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that survivability can be really big here, just to be able to go for some damage. I mean, you've done your job with the Will-O-Wisp as well as the taunt to start shutting things down, and you still have this Brave Bird available to go for some of this damage. I don't think at this point you're really that worried about speed because this Iron Hands isn't going to be able to make too much use of that at this point. So just try to soften up this Dondozo and see whether or not this Iron Hands can finish the job.
It's going to be a tall order for Iron Hands, though. Talonflame is now gone. It takes the recoil from that Brave Bird. Yes, it got a little bit of damage across, but Iron Hands now has to face down against not one, not two, but three Pokemon on the opposing side of the field. Earthquake comes out again. It's single target, so it does a little bit more damage to that opposing Iron Hands. It does, of course, get to eat its Citrus Berry, but at the end of the day, the defensive boosts on that opposing Dondozo are still going to be in action. So the Wild Charge, yes, it's going to be able to do good damage, but it's not enough to get the KO.
No, I mean, Dondozo's defensive boosts are still going to be really helpful in this case. And while the burn is available, you are at least shutting off the leftovers healing that this Dondozo would be getting. But it's still in dire straits here for this Iron Hands. You can't KO everything right now, and this Earthquake is still going to do a considerable amount.
Yeah, Dondozo's got +2 speed from, you know, the Commander ability. It's going to be outspeeding this Iron Hands. Quite wise, I think, to switch to the Drain Punch because you know you're going to be able to get the KO and you get a little bit of HP recovery as well. The issue that you've got now is, yes, you've cleared Dondozo, but you're now going to be in a 2v1 situation because Tatsugiri's jumping out the mouth. Hello, it's back on the field, and then Arcanine's going to be coming back in, and Arcanine can not only deal some decent damage, but can also throw down and intimidate, weakening the potential of Iron Hands to close out the match for Jessie.
Yep, and there's not a spread damage option available on this Iron Hands as well, so you're looking at that as just not a way to clean up both Pokemon. And with the Tatsugiri holding this Choice Scarf, it's going to get the Dragon Pulse off first.
Yes, not enough to get the KO, but there's Arcanine waiting in the wings to be like, I'll finish off the job and take game one for Yuya.
Right, really clean game there for Yuya to be able to pivot around and get that Dondozo and Tatsugiri in at the perfect time. And even with the terrestrialization of the Flutter Mane at the very beginning there for Yuya to go to that Grass Terra, it was awesome to see that he had the foresight to realize, I take a pretty big lead here if I can keep my Flutter Mane alive to get that damage down.
Exactly, and I think it was key that the Flutter Mane on Yuya's side was able to deal big damage to that Talonflame and weaken it so that towards the end game, Talonflame wasn't as reliable as we've seen it be before. You know, it could only deal one Brave Bird out and it had such little HP to be able to take that recoil. My question now is if Jessie's going to bring that Gastrodon, because I know if I was piloting this team, it would be considered high infidelity if I didn't bring the Gastrodon. I don't even look at the matchup. I want to bring it, but I do think it makes sense. You're able to apply some good damage to that opposing Dondozo as well. One issue that you have to contend with, though, is I think using that Talonflame to greater effect. I really liked how Jessie brought it, but there wasn't ever any kind of tailwind going into action, and you could see that both the Flutter Manes, you know, they're both very speedy Pokemon. Yuya's was happening to move first, so possibly having a tailwind in action might have changed the way that those Flutter Manes interacted.
Yeah, I was looking at that as one of the first options as well for that turn one, but I do feel like at the end of the day, Jessie wasn't able to pick up the KO anyway because of that Terra. So it's a little bit of a tough call, and it's very risky to figure out how to manage that first turn. If we see the same leads, I do expect a little bit of a switch up from either trainer just to maneuver through that first turn a little differently.
Yeah, I completely agree. I felt sorry for the Grimmsnarl as well on Jessie's side. I almost think with Grimmsnarl, it's a great Pokemon out front, but not so much in the back. you know, because out front you can get those screens set up, and it doesn't matter necessarily if it goes down early, because you get the free switch into a Pokemon from the back that can then start capitalizing on the defensive support it's got from Light Screen or Reflect. However, in Jesse's case in game 1, it switched in, took damage, and was gone, completely KO'd back into its Pokeball. So possibly, you know, if you're bringing Grimmsnarl, I'd like to see it out as a lead, or, you know, let's be honest, I would like to see it bench for that Gastrodon.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really tough for the Grimmsnarl there is, I wonder if it was brought maybe to be able to keep like a Dragonite in check there from Yuya.
Yeah.
Just having the Spirit Break available to at least do a little bit of damage there, and then maybe be able to weave in a screen here or there depending on what Jesse thought was going to be kind of the bigger damage threat. But it is tough because, you know, what do you really bring? This is very much like even our analysis towards the beginning of the match was so back and forth of like, but this Pokemon, but wait, but Yuya has this, but hold on a second, Jesse has this. And so that matchup really does, I think, lend itself to, you have to be precise about the Pokemon you bring and also how you pivot them through the game.
Well, you make a great observation. It really comes down to the board positioning. And whoever's going to have the upper hand on that is going to get the momentum in the match, because like you've said, there's so many different, you know, elements to this triangle of damage. We were talking about the Energy Ball and Earth Power and so on and so forth. So really coming down to which Pokemon are on the field and when you choose to Terastallize, and whether that will shape the ball position and momentum into your favor. As we saw Yuya do at the beginning, you know, it was a very defensive capability. Just on Jesse's side, again, having that support going for the Ghost Terror to avoid the extreme speed, but it didn't happen. Arcanine didn't fall for the bait. Again, you look at the team sheets, you know that there's the Ghost potential on that Talonflame. You know Jesse hasn't gone for it yet, so switch out that Arcanine Preserver for the back, and then you just go Dondozo mode. So actually, it was quite a safe turn for you. Possibly Jesse could have capitalized on the Terror on a different Pokemon to a greater advantage in the match.
Yeah, maybe the Iron Hands, but it's a little tough there because you know that the Arcanine is waiting in the wings. But this time around, we are going to see the Dragonite make an appearance here for Yuya's team next to that Flutter Mane, and Jesse right off the bat there going for the Arcanine and Flutter Mane.
Yeah, love the Arcanine coming out here. Obviously, the Intimidate going down onto that opposing Dragonite. Really nice to get a drop on it. It is multi-scale, but it is rocking Choice Band. So, you know, it's going to be able to deal a huge bit of damage, particularly if it wants to go for something into Terra Normal and start throwing extreme speeds all around the field. You know, Arcanine would be the prime target for that. Flutter Mane still being a Ghost type at this point is like, hey, I'm safe, it's all good. But then Dragonite still has loads of utility options. So getting the Intimidate down on it kind of forces Yuya to either go for that Terra to try and deal big damage, or possibly think about switching it out. But it's going to be the Terra Normal onto Dragonite. Possibly extreme speeds coming the way of that Arcanine.
Yeah, and regardless, you know, you are removing that weakness there to the Flutter Mane on the opposing side, knowing that that Moonblast is still an option. But a Protect coming in here from Yuya's Flutter Mane really makes the play that Jesse went for very safe there, with the extreme speed on the Arcanine moving first.
Love this, the double up from Jesse, following up with the Moonblast, the Terra Normal on there, enabling that Dragonite to be able to survive. And it does over 50% to that opposing Arcanine with a Stomping Tantrum.
Yeah, so not seeing the extreme speed come out here, I love that Yuya was going for just that super effective damage down onto the Arcanine. And no matter what, Yuya or Jesse ends up switching in there, and as long as it's not the Talonflame, you're still going to be able to do great damage to no matter what comes in. So very nice coverage option there.
Yes, I like the way Jesse went for that extreme speed just to break the multi-scale to enable that Moonblast, if it hadn't terrored, to be able to get the knockout. But speaking of almost knockouts, we see one Shadow Ball from one Flutter Mane into the other, going to take a cheeky bit of Life Orb recoil as Flutter Mane deals with that Terra Dragonite with the Moonblast, just giving the Arcanine a little sigh of relief that it doesn't have to take another one of those Stomping Tantrums.
Yeah, and the Choice Band tech there, I mean, Jesse is very much knowledgeable about what this Dragonite was going to go for, unless it does get the switch out there. So I like the Flare Blitz just to be able to get some more damage down onto Yuya's Flutter Mane. We're still seeing a little bit of a disparity when it comes to the speed interactions here, but I feel it's pretty good for Jesse there with that booster energy, just to make sure that you will be able to get some big damage down.
Yeah, it's almost a shame for Jesse there that the Flutter Mane didn't go down to that Flare Blitz. It would have been really nice to have got a double KO so early on in this match, because now you've got the Tatsugiri on the field, and that kind of makes you think, hey, Dondozo's very likely hiding out in the back. But then again, Tatsugiri can hold its own. It can always go for something like a Muddy Water at this point, and that would deal, you know, enough damage to, I think, be able to pick up the KO against both Arcanine and the Flutter Mane. So we'll have to see some switches.
Did you see the switch here?
I didn't. I was looking at the team sheet. It is. It's here. Yes. Let's go, Gastrodon. It's here on the field, and this is is a great call for that Muddy Water. It's going to be able to just use Storm Drain and get a special attack boost. It's not going to be able to help out the Flutter Mane, but Flutter Mane's like, it's all right, I got myself in check.
Yeah, no way. Gastrodon's going to take that Moonblast as well, but it's not going to be too worried about that. The Life Orb recoil there is going to knock out Yuya's Flutter Mane as a return Moonblast right into the Tatsugiri, removes it completely from the game.
Absolutely commanding turnout here from Jessie. That's what happens when you bring Gastrodon into the field, okay? You know, you woulda, coulda, shoulda in the first game. It's here now, proving why it is a valuable member on the team. And now considering the fact that Dondozo, the last remaining Pokemon for Yuya, is here, it doesn't have the utility to fuse with Tatsugiri in this point, so it is going to be a little bit of a Lone Ranger, and you can see why Yuya's locked in that forfeit here, and it's going to be 1-1 apiece. We're going to a game 3, Rosemary.
Yeah, I mean, that game looks a little bit differently as well. If Yuya did not get the miss of the Muddy Water, then we would see Jessie's Flutter Mane get knocked out there and unable to pick up the knockout onto the Tatsugiri, providing Yuya a free switch for the Dondozo to get that duo starting to work together.
Yes.
So really big miss there.
You can see how Yuya was trying to pilot out that game too, for sure. And just sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles with those less accurate moves. We've seen it with Rock Slide, we've seen it with Hydro Pump, and you know, Muddy Water. I remember back in 2017, I believe it was on Tapu Fini. It was running everywhere and it broke cards, but also made a few excellent games. I mean, you do run the trade-off with it. Sometimes you will miss a move, but sometimes you connect and get that accuracy drop, and then suddenly you kind of throw the coin to the opponent, being like, now you have to check your accuracy with moves. Going into game 3, however, do you think there's going to be any changes on Yuya's side? We obviously saw Jessie adapt very well in that game too by bringing that Gastrodon into great effect. But Yuya has a lot of, I think, strongness in the sense of running that Dondozo core. I like the Dragonite coming out early. I think it wasn't expecting the Arcanine to be there to intimidate it so early on. So do you think Yuya's going to bring Dragonite again or switch things up?
I feel like when you had the success with the Arcanine, because that's the Pokemon that the Dragonite did take the place of, right? I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, maybe you can keep some of that physical damage and check a little bit better if you do have the Arcanine on the other side. Unfortunately, it felt like Dragonite just didn't get a chance to find much value in that game, number 1. So I'm kind of leaning towards going back to the Arcanine in this case.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. You know, having the Arcanine there, being able to throw Intimidate around, we've seen be really beneficial as well. But let's have a look. Game 3 here. It's going to be Dragonite once again, paired up with Dondozo and Arcanine and Flutter Mane for Jessie.
Okay, so Jessie's going to get the Arcanine onto the field and get the Intimidate drop onto both the Dondozo and the Dragonite. And so this is pretty big for Jessie just to be able to have that very strong start on this turn 0. But there's still so many options for Yuya here. You might have the Tatsugiri in the back. We don't commonly see the Dondozo coming to the game by itself. And so either, yeah, I think that Yuya's spoiled for choice.
Definitely a lot of flexibility, and it's going to then come down to whether Jessie makes the right reads here. Again, Flutter Mane wouldn't be surprised to see it going for something like just another Shadow Ball at this point to try and deal some damage into the opposing Dondozo, but then at the same time, you might want to preserve it. Flutter Mane is a key Pokemon to deal with opposing Flutter Mane, so you might want to keep it in the back, possibly bring in something like the Gastrodon in case you're going to preempt the Dragonite might get out of there to bring in the Tatsugiri, but the time is ticking down. There's not a lot of time for Jessie to pick the moves here.
Okay, well, we're going to see Dragonite make a quick rotation away. Did get that Intimidate drop, so nice to be able to reset that as you see the Tatsugiri come right in. And so Dondozo at this point, I don't think is too upset about having that Intimidate drop because you do have the Commander boosts to make up for it a little bit.
Yes, exactly. You'll now be at +1 attack rather than +2, but hey, that still will pack a punch on the battlefield. You can see as well, Flutter Mane just going for the Protect here. Doesn't want to take any unnecessary damage from Dondozo. It can potentially leave the Arcanine a little bit vulnerable. It was going for the Extreme Speed into what was in that slot Tatsugiri switched in for. So really nice defensive play here from both our players in a sense.
Yeah, so while, you know, Jessie does miss the mark there onto the Dragonite, you also do keep the Flutter Mane very safe there from the Heavy Slam. And this still provides Jessie with an opportunity. You know, you did get an Intimidate drop down, and so seeing the double swap here, it feels really nice there for Jessie, not only to be able to get the Gastrodon on the field, right, in case there is a Wave Crash coming the way of Jessie's side, but you also have the Iron Hands as well to kind of put some pressure onto the Dondozo and maybe even force out a Terra.
Yeah, you're right here. I do like the double switch, not only because Gastro's on the field, but you have got 2 great counters to Dondozo here. Dondozo doesn't fall for it, though. Goes straight for the Earthquake, does a significant chunk to that opposing Iron Hands, as well as the Gastrodon taking about 1/3 of damage here. However, Iron Hand's in a position where it can go for one of those wild charges, deal big damage, and both our trainers have access to their Terra types as well. You already mentioned the Dondozo. It could always go for something like Steel type, but then it has to worry about the Gastrodon going for those powerful Earth powers.
Exactly, and so I feel like this could be a catch-22, but we will at least see a terrestrialization on Jesse's side, that Iron Hand's getting that Grass Terra type to allow it to resist those Earthquakes just a little bit better. And now when you look at that survivability, maybe there is an option for Jesse's Iron Hands at some point to be able to go for a Sword Stance.
Do you know, I really love this from the Iron Hands play. It's going for the Wild Charge now, doing a little bit of damage, will take a little bit of recoil. But I think the key thing with the Grass Terra here is you're looking at Earthquake and you're looking at Wave Crash. Both moves that are relevant of Gastrodon that the Iron Hands is going to be able to take really well now it's in that Grass typing. It also has access to something like the Drain Punch, so it's going to be able to regain a little bit of HP, as Gastrodon is demonstrating it can do too with Recover. But the key thing is you're not allowing that Dondozo to safely go for that Steel Terra, because the Drain Punch is going to do a huge chunk of damage while they're making Iron Hands even harder to take out. So I think a great Terra choice here from Jesse.
Yeah, and Jesse's also just going to go ahead and cover for that option. You'll see Yuya start to go for these yawns here. No Talonflame in sight here for Jesse means that there's no taunt on the board to be able to remove that, and there's also no way to set the electric terrain. So either way, this Iron Hands is in on a bit of a timer here before it does get put to sleep. But Gastrodon's Earth Power is still going to take this Dondozo quite low.
Yeah, that's the power of the Gastrodon. I mean, taking a look at the Dondozo as well, its main, obviously, recovery state here is it's got the leftovers, but it isn't running Protect. So you can't do that kind of protect damage to constantly rack up those leftovers recovery. So unlike Pokemon like the Gastrodon that can click Recover at any time, it shows that Gastrodon's difficult to deal with. Arcanine coming in here, I like this play, making sure that the Iron Hands doesn't go to sleep while throwing down another Intimidate, bringing that Dondozo back down to neutral. I mean, Gastrodon's going to have a little bit of a safer time in the face of those Earthquakes.
Yeah, and I think that Arcanine is going to be able to take those pretty well as well when you look at the spread damage across the board. We're about to find out, because this Dondozo is going for Earthquake, but the Gastrodon protected itself, so let's see how much this does to Arcanine.
Yes, Arcanine can be trained to be very bulky. It does over about a third of damage there, so in a reasonable position. And Arcanine now, it can be in a spot where it can always, try and go for something like, it can go for extreme speed. It can always go for something like a Flare Blitz, try and maybe get a cheeky burn, something like that, although it's not going to be too effective. But again, stops the Dondozo just going, I can go Terra Steel, because it doesn't want to take a Flare Blitz.
Well, I love this terrestrialization here from the Iron Hands to that Grass Terra as well, because you can see that Jesse is finding opportunities to cycle through those Intimidates here as well. Knowing that this is going to be very safe, Yuya's still going to go for the Yawn, but regardless of that, there's a nice switch in the back there of the Arcanine, and based on how much damage it took from just a neutral Earthquake from this Dondozo, another Intimidate drop there is going to be very safe for this Arcanine to fall into.
You're right, Arcanine can kind of keep jumping in and out, and just throwing those Intimidates down, because Iron Hands is now reasonably healthy at this point, so it can afford to come in and maybe take an Earthquake. It looks like Jesse's happy for it to go to sleep, however, as the Earthquake comes out, connects on Iron Hands, does a little slither of damage, and it can retaliate with that Drain Punch. So again, chipping away at this Dondozo, getting a little health back. I think you're right, though, at this point in time, Arcanine throwing down those Intimidates means that the Iron Hands can actually afford to go to sleep and, take some damage and wake up and Drain Punch at the end. You can see Gastrodon trying to get the KO on Dondozo, but just not quite enough.
Well, I think the problem that Yuya's running into right now is Jesse has pinned down this Dondozo. You already brought this up, that the Iron Hands is going to be able to resist these attacks better from the Earthquake and the Wave Crash, but the Gastrodon also removes that potential for the Wave Crash, and then you can see how little those Earthquakes are doing as well. So fantastic positioning here from Jesse, and this Dondozo is on its last few turns.
Yes, it's desperately trying to go for a Yawn into that Gastrodon, but it's defensively gone for a Protect here. Obviously, Iron Hand's going to be taking its turn of sleep here, and we might see that for a couple more, but I think it can afford to be here. You're right, pinning down the Dondozo can often be a really nice play around it. It does take more ball positioning and a little bit kind of more looking at the bigger picture than just clicking Haze or something like that. But this is a really key example of it. Dondozo obviously can't switch out. It's got Tatsugiri fused together with it, so there's not a lot that it can do. It's just forced to keep going for these Yawns. You've got to watch out for the amount of Earthquakes that this Dondozo has left as well. It can't go for Wave Crash with this Gastrodon on the field. And those Earthquakes are going to run out very, very fast.
Oh, well, unless you get a critical hit onto the Dondozo, that will be plenty to knock it out. And so that Tatsugiri will come back out onto the field. But you've removed such a big threat there on Yuya's board of that Dondozo. You do get a free switch now, though, so the Dragonite's going to come in pretty scot-free. And so now, if you are Jesse, you have to worry worry just a little bit about this Dragonite getting set up with an aerial ace or an ice spinner, any of those potential options.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Arcanine come back in just to throw down and Intimidate again against that Dragonite and just stop its potential with that Choice Band. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Yuya still hasn't gone for Terrestrialization.
No, he hasn't.
So there's still that in Yuya's back pocket to be able to deal big damage with something like the Dragonite here.
Yeah, I really do love this Arcanine switch in, and that does make that Dragonite a bit more manageable there with that Choice Band in tow as well. Iron Hands is still asleep here, and so that doesn't feel super good, but you're also going to see the Icy Wind coming out from the Tatsugiri, and so now we kind of have the reverse problem here for this Iron Hands. It's just a sitting duck against the Icy Winds, just to be able to drop those speeds too, but also this Dragonite, and it's going to get knocked out.
Yeah, Iron Hands, a Pokemon that gave Yuya a lot of trouble there in that Dondozo section, is now down and out. And this is the thing I was saying, you know, the Iron Hands can afford to be asleep for these kind of turns, but you almost needed to not KO the Dondozo during those sleep turns, because as soon as you did, both these Pokemon come out in the fray. Yuya's now able to have 2 Pokemon on the field, and they can just target down and deal with that Iron Hands. So you almost wanted to make sure that you'd woken up before Dondozo goes down.
Jessie still has a great option in the back to deal with the Tatsugiri and the Dragonite. However, this is where speed interaction really comes into play. The booster energy here on this Flutter Mane, we have seen be able to boost up that special attack, but it had already been on the field, so it's not there anymore. You're not entirely sure you're going to be able to get those KOs, and it's not the speed. So is this Tatsugiri faster with it?
We'll have to see. I mean, Tatsugiri is running the Choice Scarf, and so Scarf, there we go. I somehow went northern then. But it can go again for that Icy Wind and start lowering the speed a little bit more. Of course, Arcanine's not going to worry about taking any damage here from an Icy Wind, but that speed interaction, like you said, can be so critical at this point of time.
Because maybe like the Icy Wind doesn't drop the speed of the Flutter Mane enough so that we do see a bit of a big knockout here from Yuya, but it is time to Terrestrialize. And so Terra Normal now for the Dragonite, again, removing that weakness to those Fairy type attacks on the Flutter Mane.
Well, yeah, this is exactly what we saw in one of the previous games as well. Arcanine can always go for that extreme speed and break the multi-scale ability and then follow up with a Moonblast, but it's not to be. Flutter Mane actually going for the Protect here, as Arcanine does break that multi-scale just to prepare it so that possibly the Flutter Mane can follow up later and deal some good damage. Icy Wind coming out once again from this Choice Scarf Tatsugiri, able to find its mark for a little bit of chip on the Arcanine. It's interesting Yuya's got 2 Choice Pokemon on the field now, so from Jesse's perspective, you know exactly what these Pokemon are going to go for. The Aerial Ace coming out from that Choice Banded Dragonite there, but not enough to pick up the KO.
No, it's not. And so you can see that Jessie is really trying to focus down onto the more imminent threat of that Dragonite here. And I think that's really smart because you want to make sure that you do get rid of all of that damage. But the other thing about this too is that Tatsugiri really isn't doing very much at the moment. It is locked into that Icy Wind, and regardless of the speed getting dropped here, that Arcanine still has the ability to go for these priority attacks, so you're not as worried about that. But maybe this switch will also help to preserve this Arcanine for later so that you can get the Intimidate drop and maybe allow the Flutter Mane to survive.
I think you're right. You need that Intimidate later on, and it will really help negate even further this Dragonite that can still do a lot of damage with that Aerial Ace. Gastrodon has, I think, kind of done its moment on the field at this point, so it's going to have to take that Icy Wind as well as the Flutter Mane, and this is where that speed interaction you were talking about will come into the fray. It's still faster. It can go for the Moonblast.
Okay, well, that's just a nice big knockout there onto the Tatsugiri, making this a little bit more manageable. If Jessie does have 2 Pokemon remaining at the end of this one, and that Gastrodon's going to hang on, that third in the back there of the Arcanine provides a nice switch to be able to reset these speed drops, especially when you see the Flutter Mane on the opposing side now for Yuya as his 4th and final.
That's the thing, Flutter Mane coming into action here, and if you are now the Flutter Mane on Jessie's side, you've taken that speed drop, so you can always try and switch out. Arcanine's there to give you that respite, so you can come back in without having taken the drop. But the issue you've got at hand as well is the Intimidate from that Arcanine will go down against that Dragonite. This is Yuya's last 2 remaining Pokemon, so that Dragonite is going to be going for Aerial Ace for the rest of the match.
Yep. Flutter Mane is going to take a little bit of a reprieve here, just doesn't want to get caught by something by that Flutter Mane, and then Arcanine hitting the field too just continues to make that Dragonite a bit more manageable.
The HP bars are running down on Jesse's Pokemon though, so he's got to be careful that he doesn't accidentally lose a Pokemon and then be pinned into a bad position. Gastrodon just going for a Protect here, doesn't want to take anything from this opposing Flutter Mane, but the Shadow Ball was actually going down into the opposing Flutter Mane, so Arcanine going to be able to take that really nicely and allow Flutter Mane from Jesse's side to come back in with its speed stat intact.
Yeah, and the other thing about this is that we did see just how much damage that Shadow Ball did to Jesse's Flutter Mane before. And with the Icy Wind damage that happened from that Tatsugiri, I now wonder if we might be able to roll into a KO here from Yuya's Flutter Mane into Jesse's Flutter Mane.
That's very true. And of course, the Flutter Mane on Yuya's side is also running Protect, so you don't want to necessarily go for your heavy hitter, because Gastrodon really can't do too much to the opposing Dragonite, and Dragonite's still got a lot of HP. We saw that one Moonblast will only take it down to about 30% here, so Flutter Mane's going to have to find 2 ways to hit it in order to get the knockout, and then you can't ignore the Flutter Mane next to it, so Yuya's actually in a commanding offensive position.
Yeah, and this is where you can see Jesse making that decision. Like, does Yuya go for the Protect there on the Flutter Mane? And does Jesse call it? Yuya will go for the Protect, and so now Jesse, like, just kind of looking for an opportunity to weave in that damage, but to no avail here.
Yeah, isn't able to connect. Obviously, going for that Shadow Ball, we know it was going into the Ghost, not the normal type. And Aerial Ace will get the knockout on that Gastrodon. I think we saw Jesse trying to go for the recover, maybe thinking that you would double up into that Flutter Mane, but no, the Dragonite, even though it's intimidated, just showing how hard it is hitting.
Yeah, it's going to be hitting pretty hard. And even still, I think those Intimidate drops, maybe Jesse is hoping that they will be able to keep it in check. But the Flutter Mane does hang on Jesse's side. So we'll be able to use the Shadow Ball into Yuya's Flutter Mane to be able to get it pretty low.
Yeah.
But it's just not enough. Yuya's Dragonite going to clean up the game here and bring him one step closer to that top 8.
Yeah, huge congratulations to Yuya Tada there, taking that set in an amazing match. I mean,